I gotta stop playing because there are important things to say in this section. So, okay. So what's going on with this bass player? Well, this bass player happens to be following the drummer, and I told the drummer this time that I wanted a jazz waltz. So this is not in 3/4 timing. Most of the world thinks a waltz is in 3/4 timing. And for most of the world, it is in 3/4 timing. But in jazz, a waltz is in 6/8. That's why it's called a jazz waltz. So I told this drummer to play a jazz waltz at 110 beats per minute, which is the highest tempo we have right now. And it's really hard for me to not play along with this, but I need to talk about this topic, which I see as scores, arrangements, and performances. Okay. I mentioned in one of the prior segments, and by the way, this segment is 19.8. We're doing 8 segments out of the shot. This is the 8th segment. And I got to stop this drummer because he makes me want to play too much. So, okay. Whew. All right. Jazz waltzes are really cool. Now, in jazz, people immediately can hear whether or not it's in 6/8 timing or 4/4 timing, because almost all of the time it's in 4/4 timing, and if it's not, then it's probably in 6/8. Except for modern stuff or Dave Brubeck, which could be in 5/4 timing. But in any case, there's a really big difference between a score and a performance. And I alluded to this before when talking about composers and musicians. Composers tend to live in scores, musicians tend to live in performances. And that's why I deliberately chose for this section a jazz waltz played at 110 beats per minute. This is faster than all the other things, but it didn't sound faster. Isn't that interesting? So I started with a Brazilian samba at 60 beats per minute, and now I've got a jazz waltz going at 110 beats per minute. And this different in the vibe? Well, the score doesn't really kind of cover it. And this is where it comes down to the performer and the performance. But what's in between the score and the performance? There's something else called the arrangement. And the arrangement is, so let's say you have a score that has a bunch of chord changes and a melody, as opposed to a full classical score with all of the staves of all of the instruments in the orchestra telling everybody exactly what to do. Let's say it's the simplest score. What is the simplest score? The simplest score is called a lead sheet. A lead sheet has a melody and it has a set of chord changes. And there's something even simpler than a lead sheet is actually called a chord sheet. And a chord sheet just has chord changes and it doesn't have a melody. So if you were to hand a country musician in Nashville a chord sheet, no melody, just the chord changes, they could do perfectly fine accompanying you on your next album, and they'd be able to follow everything. In fact, you don't even need to tell them whether it's G, C, or D. You can just say it's 1, 4, and 5, because they're generally playing with vocalists. The vocalists don't necessarily know what key they're in, but the Nashville musicians have to figure out what key they're in. So they use Roman numerals. They call this, well, Nashville notation. So a lot of the music in Nashville, which, by the way, is the city where the 1/4 of all the albums recorded in the United States are recorded in Nashville. So although it's not as big as New York, Chicago, and LA, musically, it's pretty damn big. And they've got their own notation system called Nashville notation. The arrangement is, okay, you've got a set of chord changes, you have a melody. Well, who gets to play the melody? Is it a flute or a saxophone or a clarinet or the piano player, or is the bass player going to play it? The arrangement is which instrument is playing which part at what time. And guess what? It's not always written down. In fact, it's not even generally written down. You get 4 jazz musicians together, they know they're going to play a standard, they all have the lead sheet, they probably don't need the lead sheet, they probably know the melody, they probably know the chord changes. Who's the lead-off hitter? Generally a horn player, but it could be the piano player, it could be the bass player, it could even be the drummer in some cases. The arrangement is who's playing what at what time and in what order. And if this is a band that's been playing together for years, and they've played the same material for 20 years, they're going to get bored out of their mind unless they switch up their arrangement. So yes, the improvising is fun in terms of taking a solo over the changes, but you can also improvise the arrangement besides the solo. And that is where the score is completely not up to the task. Because unless you write in the score, okay, violin 1 you play now, contrabassoon you play then, which is the way classical music works, but it's not necessarily the way jazz works. And it's also definitely not the way that I work. I said, I like walking on the tightrope, lose your balance, almost fall over, get it back. The arranging is such a rich goldmine of expression for performance. You could start with a guitar player strumming the guitar and singing a melody, and you could unfold that into an arrangement where all of a sudden a drummer gets added, a bass player gets added, a lead guitar gets added. It's the same piece of music as the solo guitarist strummed to accompany himself and sang a melody. You could even take the same piece and have a symphony orchestra do it. If you listen to the radio, Beatles music shows up in elevators symphonically handled all the time. So I want to make the point that the score is an inadequate definition of music for an improviser, and a performance can't just be totally winged. You need something in between, and you need some kind of notion of an arrangement. And guess what? You can't make the arrangement until you know who the players are. Because if you have a bass player that could only play 1, 4, and 5 but can't take a solo, then you can't give the bass player a solo because it'll be really boring. So for me, the arrangement is where the real action is, where you get to collaborate on what is the performance going to sound like. And it depends on who's in the room and how they're feeling that day.